Hi, I'm Richard Costello, and thank you for tuning into episode number 4 of the Castler podcast. Today, I'm joined by Charlotte Allen, Marketing Manager at Millgate Connect. Charlotte, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's great you're here, seeing you again for the second time this week, although this time virtually. Just in terms of what we're going to be covering today, so we're going to be talking about a range of things related to sort of Charlotte's career, and also, I guess, kind of broader life, I guess, in terms of the MBA. But to begin with, talking about Charlotte's experience working in manufacturing, some of the challenges and insights from being a B2B marketer in that sector, which I'm really looking forward to. Charlotte's decision to pursue an MBA and the impact it's had on her career, and also Charlotte's freelance work over the past couple of years and what's motivated her to do that, and also some of her reflections on the experience so far. But firstly, thought it'd be great to give listeners a bit of context about who you are and your career to date.
Okay, hi. So I'm Charlotte. If we go all the way back to where before I started my career, I actually come from an engineering background. I did engineering at college. That's partly because I come from a family of engineers, and because it was incredibly challenging, I then decided to not pursue engineering any further. I went on and I did a business degree at Sheffield Hallam. Within that, it was a 4-year degree, so I did a placement where I worked for a year. I was doing marketing for a manufacturing company, which is, again, where all of this kind of started. Got first class in my degree, obviously graduated, took a couple of years out, and then I went and got my first proper full-time job, where I was a marketing specialist for GE. So obviously a massive multinational corporation. So that was a massive learning curve. I then went from that to a startup company. So I couldn't really have gone from much different environments, where I then went to work still again in the manufacturing industry. I worked for a company called Hogen Systems, which was super interesting. It was all about atmospheric water generation technology. I worked with some incredibly amazing people there. Whilst I was there, I also studied part-time on an apprenticeship for my MBA, which Richard obviously mentioned previously. I did that, like I said, part-time. So I think that took me 3 years in total whilst I was working at Hogen, because I was at Hogen for 7.5 years. And then this year I started working as the marketing manager for Millgate Connect, which is it's a branch of Millgate, which we work in the telecom side and connectivity.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of career journey, and also particularly starting out at GE, which is just such a massive name.
I know.
I mean,
to go from that to a micro company, and everybody said, "You're crazy, don't do it." But I did, and I'm glad I did. It was an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, I think also seeing kind of both sides of the coin in terms of a really huge, like, multinational kind of iconic old traditional business, and then also and now obviously now working in a tech company as well.
I know.
Super
So I've gone from the tiny to the massive to medium. So covered all scales.
Yeah, and also I guess like freelancing at the same time gives you another perspective on top. So yeah, no, that's great. In terms of starting off, then we'll kick off with manufacturing, which is really interesting, especially with both of us being in Sheffield, and it's sort of with things like the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in the city, and obviously the massive heritage of steel manufacturing. It's really interesting to speak to somebody with expertise in that area. So I guess to begin with, what's it like to work as a marketer in the manufacturing sector, and what are some of the idiosyncrasies and nuances to be aware of?
Yeah, so obviously, as you say, Sheffield's got a massive history of manufacturing, and I think we're so lucky to live here and to still have such a large manufacturing base in the city. I think that's really important. The kind of manufacturing companies that I have worked with have always been kind of the large-scale bespoke projects. So when I'm talking about my experiences, that's more the kind of marketing that I was working on. Obviously, there are lots of manufacturers who do lots more, smaller projects and like churning things out. But just a little bit of background so you understand where I'm coming from. So when I've been working in marketing in the manufacturing industry, the buyers are typically, engineers or technical managers. So they care a lot about like the functionality of a project or something like that, rather than the branding. Like typically when you think of marketing, you think of storytelling, and getting that emotional appeal. Whereas I personally have found in manufacturing industry that's not so much the case, because like I say, they're more interested in the nitty gritty. They want to know the product specs and things like that. That's more important to them. So traditional marketing doesn't necessarily always work in that respect. So you have to learn so much about the actual product that you are doing. And again, a lot of what we did was kind of like bespoke large scales projects. So it's doing almost that account-based marketing for one project that might be £20 million, rather than 16 projects at £2 million, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of difference in that way. Also in the manufacturing industry, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of certifications. So having to like learn and understand what's relevant, because again, like you might have a customer that works in the MOD, their regulations and certifications are going to be really, really different to somebody that's working offshore oil and gas, or somebody that's working in green energy, or any of these other markets. So knowing exactly what your customers needs, of course, in any strand of marketing, you need to understand your customer. But I would say in this respect, it's almost more important, because the people that you're talking to, they are going to be subject matter experts. I find in a lot of other industries, you might be talking to just somebody in procurement, but in the manufacturing industry, you're probably talking to somebody that's technical. You're probably talking to somebody who knows the ins and outs. So it's very different in that respect. And it's also, it's a very old school traditional industry. I found a lot of the way that they do marketing even today in 2024 is kind of like that more traditional. It's more print marketing. It's more going to trade shows rather than digital marketing strategies. Like in one company I currently still work with now, they use Excel rather than like a CRM, digital, anything like that. So it's just it's a very big, it's a very old industry, but it's still got a lot of like power. But it's understanding how you market to that is quite different.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think a lot of it is sort of manufacturing does have a bit of a reputation, particularly for B2B marketers, as being perhaps, I guess different. And I
Mm,
think what you've outlined explains, I think, a lot of the reasons why, in terms of the fact that you've got such knowledgeable buyers, and the fact that the buying decisions are driven
mhm.
by so many kind of specific, I guess, features or components of the product, or sort of the
Yeah.
specs of it. I mean, one thing you mentioned was sort of the almost you'd be marketing around a big specific project. Would that
Mhm.
be during the project as a kind of retention and growth sort of to an existing company, or would it be sort of almost supporting almost like sales enablement to get one of those really big deals?
It's
Or
a
how
bit of
was interested?
both, to be honest. So again, in the manufacturing industry, a lot of it, I would say, relies on relationships. And once you've kind of got that once you've got that relationship, it's you're pretty much cemented in there. So it is used as a sales enablement tool in that respect. But I would also say, like the accounts with marketing is used in terms of, like you say, retaining it, because again, a lot of these projects, they'll run for 36 months, but then it will come up for review, and then things will need changing again. And again, within the manufacturing industry, you have a lot of support contracts. So it's tailoring your thing to be like, okay, why do you need support? Because again, your MOD is going to need different support to your wind farm and things like that. So it's retaining that as well as using it as a sales enablement.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I guess also in terms of, I know this isn't actually one of the questions that we'd
Mhm.
kind of outlined, but we'll get to those. But just in terms of like the difference between working at a huge business like GE, I think it's the sort of, if I understand right, it's the lighting kind of part of GE, and then Hogen Systems, which is, as you mentioned, like a much smaller business. Comparing and contrasting what it's like to work in those businesses, was it vastly different, or was it actually similar fundamentally? I don't know how was that?
Could not be further apart if it tried. I
Right.
mean, everyone has completely different experiences. I have friends that work in corporate jobs and they absolutely thrive. And I think that's fabulous. However, for me, I didn't thrive in that kind of corporate setting because I like to think that I'm like quite a creative person and I like to have like creative control over what I do. When you're in such a large organization like that and there are so many levels to go through, I sometimes felt like my work got lost, which is fine. Like I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. It just didn't suit me. Whereas then when I came over to a small organization, everything that I did had value. I could say, I've done this and this has made an impact. Whereas when I was at GE, I could do something and I might never see it again, like that kind of thing. So that's my own personal experience. Like I say, like everyone has completely different ones. Yeah, I don't have anything
Yeah.
else to add.
Yeah, no, it resonates a lot. And for me personally, I think it is really a personality and maybe also a career context thing, because I think I wouldn't sort of say that, yeah, it's better to work in big or small businesses, but they definitely
Yeah.
do have kind of trends around its, more ability to, I guess, yeah, maybe see impact
Yeah,
right the
even
way
things
through from
down
end to
to
end in a smaller
the
business.
strictness of the brand guidelines. Obviously, you have to have brand guidelines. Even as a micro company startup, we had brand guidelines, but it was the restrictions within that. Like it was very, very limiting. And like I say, like I like to be able to, kind of put my own touch onto things when I'm doing things. Like I want to be able to say, yeah, I did that, rather than just being like, well, Tom, Dick, or Harry wrote that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, it's actually something that we as Castler are sort of thinking about, because we realise that sort of particularly around design, while we've got like a logo and a sort of some colours and font and so on, we're sort of being probably like stretching it a bit far in terms of like like lots and lots of different kind of like, ultimately when we actually come to create things, there's lots of different sort of
Mm.
styles and so on. So we're sort of wanting to, but I think I think to what you're saying as well, I think it's great to have that freedom and be, when you are in a small business, you can kind of do maybe more experimental things,
hmm
which is good.
I also,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is anyone else's experience, but I also find it's easier and more accepted to fail in a small organization. People are almost a bit more lenient, and again, completely personal experience. Whereas like when you're in such a giant corporation, they just see, oh well, that didn't work. Why did that not work? Okay, right. Well, that's a problem, and we'll like, but because they don't know you as a person, they don't know why you might have made that decision. Whereas in a small organization, they might be like, okay, right, I understand why you did that. Didn't work. Let's try something else. Again, personal experience, but that's how I found it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense. And yes, to return to the manufacturing stuff
Mm,
specifically, unconsciously we sort of touched on this in the initial sort of question, but any kind of specific challenges to it? You've mentioned sort of the very technical and sort of very educated
mm.
buyers and some other bits and pieces, and maybe the traditional kind of backdrop, but I don't know what the main things are from your point of view.
Absolutely. I would say that getting the buy-in from technical people can be like one of the hardest things. I'm not even just talking about customers, I'm talking about internally within the company that you're working in as well, because they know the products and they know every single thing about this thing, and they might just see you as being just coming along, oh yeah, right, okay, what are you doing here? They just see you as an add-on function. So and sometimes they can get quite bogged down in the detail, and they don't necessarily understand that actually the marketing is here to help translate all of this technical detail into more simple terms for other people, because if they know these really complex things in a way they almost just expect other people to. The same way that in marketing, we sometimes use acronyms, and like I might say it, and then like one of my friends will be like, "What does that mean?" Like, because to us that's totally normal, but to a non-marketer it's not. So it's the same kind of thing here. Like that to them, these technical things and this level of detail is just standard, but to somebody else it wouldn't be. So getting that across both to them and then also being able to physically like translate that yourself into content that can then be distributed, that's quite a challenge. And like I say, like what what you have to do with that is you have to be quite creative, because like I say, like traditional marketing is a lot of storytelling, but you can't necessarily get those stories and that emotion out of technical people. So you have to really work with them and be creative when it comes to that. Um, and obviously another thing that comes, and again, this is more of a personal challenge for the companies that I have worked with, is case studies are an excellent way of like getting that storytelling across and getting that emotive bit across. But we worked with a lot of companies who firstly can be quite cagey, for various reasons. It can be like quite a closed off industry. Like sometimes they don't want you to share their name, which is fine, but then sometimes they don't want you to share nearly anything. So that can be quite difficult. And again, like I mentioned, some of the projects that we do, they're really, really like long scale projects. So actually getting the data to pull together to be like, okay, will this help with XYZ? You don't necessarily get that for such a long time that almost by the time you do have that data, it's almost a little bit outdated. So that can be quite quite difficult in that respect. But yeah, like in terms of this is based off, your large scale projects. Again, like there are people who do have smaller ones where they will be able to be like, oh, okay, well, we created this and they implemented it, and we were able to improve XYZ by 20%. Unfortunately, just in my personal experience, I've not really been able to see or to do that, because it has been the large scale bespoke kind of projects where, like I say, like some of them will just be like, no, sorry, we can't, like, you can't publish our name, you can't publish what this project was about. And that can be quite difficult, because things like that are a great sales tool, but if you can't shout about what you do great, you have to find other ways to do it.
Yeah, it definitely resonates in terms of the case studies point. I think that how like I think I've one of the reflections that I've had about case studies and customer stories is, if you think there's a chance to ask and you think there's a good story, just to kind of to do it rather than to, because one of the things I think I've done is like overthought it and been like, oh yeah, this is really good kind of outcome that's just happened. But if I wait another 3 months, another 6 months, and so on and so
Mm.
forth. But I think it's just about kind of
Being
uh,
proactive.
yeah, being proactive, and
No.
also maybe not waiting until there's every single last like proof point that you would like to have.
Hmm.
Because I think also with that, it's kind of I think probably a degree of kind of looking for the opportunities to get those and getting them in place is a good like principle when it comes to case studies.
Hmm.
Another thought just on what you're mentioning, because this actually came up in a conversation we were having with another company earlier on this morning. Just in terms of like, and I thought it might be quite relevant to what you were saying in the manufacturing sector, in terms of needing to tell different stories to different parts of the decision making unit. So,
Hmm.
for instance, if you've got C level or very senior decision makers, then you need to tell, maybe perhaps ironically in some ways, often a more simple story that's
Absolutely,
about
yeah.
business outcomes,
Hmm.
versus you also need to sell to the kind of subject matter expert, perhaps the sort of
Hmm.
individual contributor type of roles, who are actually really knowledgeable about the specific things. So I don't know whether that was something that you had to grapple with in manufacturing, in terms of combining in a story or in a sort of in the marketing, that those two perspectives.
Yeah, I would. And again, this also comes back to obviously with your clients, but also internally. Because I found that sometimes, like the MD won't necessarily be from a manufacturing background, and they come in and that they want things to be nice and easy and shiny. So you kind of have to go to them with, okay, well, this is the benefits. Whereas, like I say, then your technical director will be like, okay, well, that sounds great, but what does that actually mean? So again, even internally and externally, it's having to balance that message between who you are literally talking to at the same time. So again, that's even within your top level management. Your technical director is going to have a completely different opinion to what your chief commercial officer is, because they're more focused on the money, whereas the technical directors are going to be more focused on how does this actually physically work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a thread coming through on this already on the manufacturing side of things throughout a lot of what you said, is that the internal sort of dealing with internal stakeholders is a big part of the challenge, perhaps as much as it is kind of, actually marketing to the
Yeah.
end customers, because they're so key to doing it effectively.
In fact, say adding on to that, in terms of like I say, what the one thing that I would say is that you have to be able to go and talk to absolutely anybody in that business, and you have to be okay with the fact that somebody who is incredibly technical might just look at you and say, I don't even want to waste my time and talk with you. But you have to push past that. You have to go and you have to get that information and that buy-in from everybody, because if you don't fully understand what they are doing, you won't be able to market it properly.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that actually. My one of my first bosses said that similar thing to me. Like, you need to kind of go up to people's desks more. It's like a bit of feedback that kind of stayed with me for quite a long time, in terms of, stop like sending people messages on Teams
Yeah,
or
and it's
emailing them.
difficult.
Just
It's not.
just
It's a
when you, especially when
scary
you're
thing to
starting
do,
out. Yeah,
but
yeah, to
I
kind
think.
of be like, I need to. Interrupting people and being like, I need to know this piece of information, especially when you're not that confident about the domain you're in at that point. So
Absolutely, yeah.
so this is an interesting point. So, because I think manufacturing and tech are often, I think often perhaps they're converging in some senses, and also they're often kind of people, I think, and agencies and marketers will often move between them. So you've obviously been working in both and have worked in both. What are the main differences that you've seen in terms of working in marketing and manufacturing versus tech?
Specifically in terms of marketing, I would say that the biggest difference is the focus on traditional marketing in the manufacturing industry to digital marketing in the tech. What I mean about that is, like, when I say go back to in the manufacturing industry, there's not much emphasis on particularly like being online. It's more about like your print adverts and your trade shows and your networking and things like that. Whereas in the tech industry, I've noticed that a key element is being online, as you would expect it to be. It's a lot more about being more metrics driven. So like looking at your click-through rates and everything like that. Whereas I personally have found in the manufacturing industry, if you've got a website, great, well done. That's that's that like in that
That's
opinion,
digital,
yeah,
ticked
they're like
off. Is
that.
that,
That's
yeah?
digital. Maybe you'll do a little bit of SEO, maybe you'll do a little bit of PPC, but it's not a major thing. Whereas in the tech industry, it is a lot more so. And maybe that's because if I don't know if I should say this, but the tech industry, it is quite saturated. So that in the manufacturing industry, they're doing slightly different things, so it's easier to stand out. Whereas in the tech industry, it is a lot more saturated. So there is a lot more people doing the same thing. So you do have to invest more in that being online, because obviously traditionally we are going more online. We do spend more time on our phones. We do spend more time on our laptops and things like that. So if you can get your message out there in front of more people, then it's that's how they're going to do it. Um, I think also, again, I found my personal experience, with the marketing activities like being so much more digital in the tech industry, you can also collect that data a lot easier. And again, that comes down to more of like your sales life cycle and stuff being not not quicker. Well, it is quicker, but in terms of being able to sell more things more rather than doing like a one-off big bespoke project. So it's easier to collect that data because there's more of it. You've got more, you're selling to more people rather than just selling to a few. Also, another big difference in manufacturing, you have a tangible product. You can actually see the physical attributes of something, like its weight, its size, the materials that it uses. Like in tech, you don't really have a physical. I mean, sometimes you will, but typically you don't have anything tangible. So it's more about your messaging and like how do you get across like the benefits of increased productivity and future-proofing your business. So like you have to do that through things like demos and webinars rather than, having an actual physical sample that you can take to someone and say like, oh, look, this is the most lightweight version because it's made of carbon steel rather than being something else where, it's obviously it's going to be more clunky or whatever that specific product benefit is. In tech, it is more, it's your intangible benefits and that you have to get that messaging across for.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. And I think I've not really with manufacturing. So it's been kind of an adjacent sort of element in a few kind of projects that I've worked on in my career, but I've never worked in anything directly. So it's really interesting. And I guess a final bit on the manufacturing section then. So what are the main bits of advice you'd give to a budding marketer starting out in manufacturing?
You've got to be confident, like we were just saying a few minutes ago, like you have to be able to go up and talk to people because sometimes they are going to make you feel like you're an add-on, and that's not particularly nice, but unfortunately, that happens. But you have to make sure that you understand the product. So you have to go and spend time with the technical people. You need to show them that you care. You're not just there to like color things in, which is sometimes what they might say. It has been said to me before. It's not particularly nice, but it does. And it's quite possible you'll have like quite a few big bespoke projects. So again, leaning into that account-based marketing theory, embrace that customer-centric marketing. And again, even within like the same project, you'll have different messaging because there's different people and different functions within the buying decision. So you need to make sure that whether you're talking to the CEO or whether you're talking to one of the laborers, you need to make sure that your messaging is right for them. But finally, when it comes to manufacturing marketing, I'd say be patient because results can take a really long time. Sales cycles, like I say, they can be really, really long. So you need to focus on building that trust and staying consistent and not just being like, oh, I haven't had 100 people download my white paper, because that's not the thing that's going to drive it for you. It's going to be more about that relationship and that messaging that's more important than getting your click-through rate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when some of the things that, and this is probably a bit of a contrarian take. I don't want to steal your thunder from later on, but I guess some of the things that I'm hearing about manufacturing being a bit more traditional and so on, actually kind of somewhat ironically feel to me like actually directions that tech is actually has gone in the last like year or so, where a lot of people that I've spoken to have talked about how much kind of in-person and in-person events getting together and also driving towards more kind of relationship focused kind of initiatives, and actually maybe a sort of slight decrease in investment in digital, or at least perhaps particularly paid digital. I think that I was listening to a podcast from Chris Walker, who you might have come across, but basically he's sort of quite well followed, particularly in tech, and he was saying that the combo that he's sort of seeing work really well at the moment is organic social, combined with in person, which I think was a really interesting as the kind of the two highest ROI things to do, and also or I guess maybe more sort of organic content potentially, but so and paid actually not being part of that actually being smart about investing in those two areas, which I thought, was interesting. It did resonate with me in
I
terms
think
of what
that is,
I've seen recently
yeah,
working
really
well.
interesting. And personally, I agree with that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't obviously invest in digital. I think that you should, but I do personally believe that, it is the long-term relationship building that is what's important. As a society, we've got a little bit, I don't know how to say it, not reliant on, but in things like Amazon Prime, you can get things the same day. We've become too short-term focused that sometimes I think, we need to take a step back and think, actually, why am I purchasing from this person or this company or this brand? Oh, it's because I like the branding, I like the messaging, and I like the people that are there. Like, a lot of times you'll see things, somebody like might leave a company and they'll take people with them because people believe in that person. And that's where I think, this face to face and this actual, it's being real and it's the authenticity. I think that also comes across in your branding massively, and I don't think you can really fake that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think
Mm.
it'd be interesting to see how things pan out, because I'm wondering whether things are going to, the pendulum sort of swung
It's
really
gonna,
heavily to
yeah,
digital because of COVID, and then it's now swung really far back because it's like, oh, we can now be back in person, and whether it will kind of settle somewhere in the middle. But
yeah.
I
I
guess
mean,
that's
in
the
the
thing
middle
with
would
marketing,
be
is you never know, really.
ideal. That is what I would like it to do, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen. Next year might be completely different.
Yeah, and I think the other point on that is, it sort of, one of the things that's maybe implicit in what I was saying is about deal values. So where you've got really high deal values, you can
Mm,
afford to sort of invest more in maybe in person and relationship stuff. Whereas if you're,
mhm,
whether it's manufacturing or tech, the deal
mm.
value will have quite a big influence on sort of what you can afford to do on a kind of
Absolutely,
per
yeah.
person basis, which is another kind of big factor. Probably another big
Mhm,
thing that I've kind of, for me personally, this year has been a big kind of learning, is like really driving home that lesson for me in a few
mhm,
experiences around working with different clients, where they've, some might have like a situation where they get one new customer in a year,
mhm.
and that's can pretty much be almost like ticking off their kind of customer acquisition needs. And
Yeah,
then another client whereby, really they need to be getting like 10 a quarter,
yeah,
for instance, and just seeing the difference in terms of the different initiatives that are going to stack up from an ROI perspective in those different contexts is interesting.
yeah.
So onto the next bit around your MBA, which is really interesting, because I don't actually think I kind of know. I'm not sure I know anyone with an MBA. So
Oh,
that's like
really?
quite, no, I know. It's like, particularly like, often it's like, it can be people who are maybe towards the end of their careers, or kind of the
It's
sort
quite
of,
American as well.
yeah. So it's really interesting. So I guess to begin with, like, I think you mentioned it was part of a kind of an apprenticeship, it was sort of
Mhm.
linked to that. But what made you decide to do it?
Two parts to it, really. One was obviously the personal growth, and then the other part was opportunity. Like you say, it was an apprenticeship. I was over at Hallam, Sheffield Hallam. I was talking to somebody, and we were talking about, and they said, "Oh, you know what? You might qualify to do," and because I'd spoken about that I enjoyed learning, I really enjoyed doing my undergrad degree. And said, "Oh, I'd love to be able to do that." So, went away, did some research, and found out that yes, I could apply to do it as an apprentice. So it was at no cost to me. It was part-time over 3 years, and it cost the business 5% of the fees. I think it was. So it was something minimal like that. And the business, luckily for me, bought into that, which was great. It means they definitely, I mean, they did keep me for longer than 3 years anyway, but it meant they definitely got to keep me for 3 years, and I got to go and do some learning, which I absolutely love doing. I say, if I could afford to do a research degree, I would go and do it tomorrow. Um, so yeah, I couldn't really say no when this opportunity was given to me. So yeah, in terms of wanting to do it for that, but I also know, like, obviously it would be beneficial for my career. Obviously I'd done an undergrad degree in business. At this point I was heading up the marketing for Hogen Systems. Um, And I knew obviously it would help my CV and everything, but it was more about making me better at my job that I was doing at the time. That was kind of why I wanted to do it, because it's a very rounded degree. Like you cover all different aspects as well. Like you have to do a marketing module, obviously, but you cover all different bits. And working in a micro company as I was, having a handle on more areas than what I was doing, I knew that would be helpful, and it was. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a great scheme as well. Like it sounds like it just adds a lot of value,
Mm.
because I wasn't sure. I didn't realize until we spoke about it a bit before today, but that it's a case of the value proposition for the company is you pay 5% of the MBA, but you get the employee for 3 years.
Hmm.
So you kind of have that solidity. And then I guess, is it that the government sort of contributes the other part of
Yeah,
it
I'm not sure
to
if
the
it's government
uni?
or the
Because maybe
university or.
they're obviously, yeah.
Hmm. But also with the MBA being an apprenticeship, every single module that I did, so finance, operations, leadership, any of it, I had to do it related to my company. So I actually, everything had almost like something tangible that I could give back to the business as well. So that's another business benefit. So like I had to do like a financial analysis on the company and things like that, which I would never have done. Why would I have done that? So that was
Yeah.
beneficial for me to get that experience and that exposure, but also beneficial for the company to, have someone do that for them without them having to go and get someone else to do it.
Yeah, I think schemes like that, yeah, really cool.
Mm.
Um, and I think as well, like having people earlier on in their careers getting MBAs, I think is
Mm.
because it's something
I was
I
one of the
yeah
youngest because I think I was maybe 28 when I started it or something. Um, and I was one of the youngest on the course, which was weird, but nice.
yeah. The closest thing I've got to an MBA is, I think my mum once bought me a secondhand copy of a book called The 10-Day MBA, which is like really old. It's like from the 80s, or something like that. It was like really, all the examples were like really
I
really old
kind of
school.
really
But
want to see this.
yeah, it is on my bookshelf, but I've not read it cover to cover, but I've like dipped
Mm.
into it and sort of
A
been
lot of
like
the
quite
theory will
confused by a
still
lot of
be the
it, basically.
same.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well. Yeah, because reading things that haven't from the past, if you like,
Mm.
from several decades ago. Actually, as you say, like it'll be interesting to see what hasn't changed, and that can be an
Mm.
important thing to note. I mean, on that point, I was reading this really really short story book called Obvious Adams, which is all about. It's actually written in 1916, so like
Oh
over
wow.
100 years ago, and it's considered to be like one of the sort of iconic books about. Or it's really like a tiny short story. Like I literally read about half of it on the bus to the office today. It's that short, and the bus is only about half an hour.
Wow.
So it was a really really short book, but it's all about this. It's like a story about this guy who goes and works in an advertising agency, in I think in New York, in the 1910s or late
Mm.
1910s, and yeah, it's super interesting. I'd recommend people check
Oh
it
yeah, I'll
out.
definitely have a
Yeah,
read of that.
it's all about basically like if you just often marketing is about doing the obvious thing. That's why it's called
Mm.
Obvious Adams. So like in terms
Mm.
of just for instance, like make sure that you've researched the product, service, and customer, and then just kind of like say what the benefit is, or say it's kind
Because
of like
sometimes the
basically saying
fundamentals get missed, don't they?
exactly. I think that's like that's the message I take, and just kind of basically just do the obvious thing, be
Mm.
persistent, and just yeah, which I think is a lesson that and I guess be like think in simple terms as well. I think that's probably the other
Mm.
thing that comes across. But yeah, so on the MBA, what are the most important things, or the most important thing that you've learned from doing it?
Obviously I learned loads of things, and this is not to do with the learning, I will get back to that. Was just the people that I met some really amazing people, and from all different walks of life, and I was very very lucky to have that. But in terms of the actual learnings, probably strategy and collaboration. Obviously I already had experience in marketing strategy, I was doing it for my job. But over the course, again, as I mentioned already, I looked at all different aspects of strategy, like finance, operations, leadership, of course, marketing. But the thing when it comes to collaboration is getting these things to all marry up. Um, Being able to look at the bigger picture and having like a more holistic view of business rather than like you could argue that sometimes, and do you know what, I probably slip into it now as well, sometimes have like a slightly myopic marketing view on the business. Like I'll look at it specifically from this would be the best thing to market the business. But again, the learning from the MBA is to not just look at that, and it's to look at all the different functions and how that they can work together so that the business as a whole can thrive rather than just the marketing department.
Yeah, that's. I think to have that and be in marketing, I think must be super valuable. Because I think that's probably something that it's an accusation that is probably leveled, probably mainly quite unfairly at marketing, but
Mm-hmm.
perhaps sometimes there's an element of truth in it in terms of like it not being. You were mentioning in the manufacturing section earlier around kind of people thinking of marketing as being the colouring in department and so on. So I think
Mm-hmm.
having real kind of deep expertise
Mm-hmm.
around business more generally is great.
Yeah, 100% agree with that.
And I guess this sort of leads into it, but maybe there's something really specific you could think of. But is there anything like day to day that is changed if you think about kind of pre MBA, post MBA, like different things in terms of the way you work?
Yeah, so again, like it's made me more compassionate with like other departments. Like I say, like it's easy to be like, okay, I have these metrics and I think that this will be best for the business, but you have these metrics. Okay, but if we align X, Y, and Z, like we can make that work together. Um, and this maybe is like a little bit of a downer, but I feel it gives me more weight as like as a person being like a woman in marketing. Again, this comes back to the being the coloring in department. You can sometimes like be a little bit dismissed, and having that just those letters after my name and that like and being able to say, okay, well, I know that this will help from like a marketing perspective, but it will also help from a financial perspective. Like having that, I feel like it just gives me a bit more credibility and like it can help like push away the imposter syndrome a little bit. Like when people do sometimes dismiss marketing a bit, if you can marry it up with those other bits that I have learned from those other, I'm going to call them modules, departments, whatever you want to call it, then it just like I say, it helps to just put a little bit more behind it. So I feel like people respect me a little bit more.
Yeah, if I had an MBA, I'd definitely be mentioning it all the time. I'd be like, be like, well, as an MBA, my perspective as an MBA is you're not taking it into account.
Mhm.
No, that makes a lot of sense though, and I mean, like legitimately though, like it's a big thing to have. So
Mhm.
yeah, like it's a very very valid perspective to mention. And finally, on the MBA point, I mean, what would you? It sounds like you probably would recommend it to other people, but would you recommend anything specifically about pursuing an MBA if somebody's considering it?
Well, I would, but only if you enjoy learning. Um, and the reason that I say this, it's a really tough degree. Again, I know it was an apprenticeship, so I don't know if like some of these people, went into like redundancy or anything, but I think we started out with about 30 people at the beginning of our course, and at the end, we had 11 that graduated without like taking like a deferral or dropping out. So there will have been a few more that like, graduated a year or 2 years later or anything, but in that time we went from 30 to 11, like it
Wow, it's like
it's
a it's
it's
like a game show
hard.
or something.
You
Yeah,
know, I know.
yeah,
It's hard. It's a lot to when you're working full time, you have to, they say a day a week, but like when it comes to like your thesis and stuff, I was spending full weekends like studying, researching, interviewing people, transfer. I mean, actually, to be fair, it's probably easier now because things like this, you you can just transcribe them. And even though it was only a handful of years ago that I did mine, we didn't have the ability to transcribe things. So I literally physically had to listen back to interviews and write down what like the key points was. So actually, do you know what? Maybe it is easier now. But I also, I found it incredibly valuable. I'm really, really pleased that I did it, but I also know that it's not for everyone and it is a big commitment. So if you enjoy learning and you are prepared to commit to it, absolutely 100% go for it. But it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I think particularly doing it while doing a full-time job, I think that, yeah, I
Honestly,
can
there were
imagine that's
people on my
intense.
course who were working full-time, who were doing the MBA part-time, and who also had a family. And
Mm,
I do not know how they did it. I have a dog, and I found that stressful. So, absolutely
yeah.
massive respect to those people, because I don't know how you can raise a family and do all of those things all at the same time. I don't know when they slept.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, I can definitely imagine that would be, it's quite hardcore.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So, final section then around freelancing.
Mm.
You've been freelancing for the last couple of years, I think.
Mhm.
Um, Interested to understand initially sort of what motivated you to begin doing that.
It came about quite organically. To be honest, again, it comes kind of back to that opportunity. There's a guy I know who's the MD of a company. Again, this is still in the manufacturing industry. He approached me a couple of years ago and he said, can you help out? We don't have a marketing department. We don't have the budget for a marketing department. We don't have the budget for a marketing agency. You know the industry. Can you give us a hand? It'll be like, I don't know, a day a week for 6 months kind of thing. And I was like, yeah, cool. Why not? A bit of time commitment, figured it would be something fun. I get to be creative. And like I say, like I already knew the industry and everything like that, but it also gave me an opportunity to still learn a new business and new things like that. So yeah, that's how I got into it. Really, it was almost out of luck.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's having initially worked freelance. I think it was, yeah, definitely opened my eyes really really quickly to a lot of new things. And I think the ability, as you say, to then also with freelancing, you can be exposed to loads of different businesses. I mean,
Mhm.
I guess similar to working as an agency, so makes sense. And I guess you kind of alluded to it, but because I know the next question is around kind of what kind of freelance projects do you work on, but it sounds as though it's sort of um, working almost like a fractional marketing leader, working sort of
Almost,
a day a week. Is
yeah.
that sort of like almost on retainer as a sort of, because I know that's a model that is reasonably common, but is that a fair kind of characterization of
Yeah,
what you've been doing?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean that's not the only situation, but for that particular business, that is how that works. And now I kind of just do like a day a month, just almost like keeping in touch days, just to check that
Yeah,
they've got their branding on point and everything like that. So yes, for that, the retainer model works really well, and it works well for them. It works well for me, but it's not always the case. Sometimes I just have people say, "Can you know, everything for me has always kind of been like through word of mouth." So they'll be like,
yeah,
"Oh, we work with so and so, and they mentioned you might be able to help us out with, like doing some content for the website." So like it's that's typically how it's worked for me.
yeah. And then in terms of sort of, so other projects is more kind of a specific thing, like, we need to refresh the website, or
Yeah,
we've got a particular kind of initiative that we need support with.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah, I'd say that.
yeah, that makes sense. And what have you enjoyed the most so far of freelancing?
Oh, I mean, I like the opportunity of still being involved in the manufacturing space because, like I say, obviously I have moved across to tech. And although I'm not an engineer, I'm still a little bit of an engineering nerd at heart. So I like to, still be able to do that. I've got to meet with some of the smartest people that you will ever meet. Like, I call her one of my friends. She is one of my friends. But she has two PhDs and things like that, and she's so smart. And you just don't get to necessarily meet and work with people like that if you just stay in employment. So in terms of that, I find that really interesting. But again, it's just it's passionate about seeing like how my creativity can be used in like different ways rather than obviously when you're employed, it's it can be a little bit constrained sometimes because you're having to go to somebody else's vision. And although obviously you are going to another company's vision when you're freelancing, you have a little bit more, what's the word? I can't think of the word, but you have more scope to be able to play around with things and to try different things. So that's something that I really enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that combination as well is nice because it means that you've got kind of a bit of both. And because I guess, yeah, freelancing in some ways can be, I guess, having, yeah, worked freelance and also worked as an employee as most freelancers, I think, would have done. I guess there is something really nice about being an employee in terms of being part of a team and having that kind of stability and so on. But then
Mhm.
also freelancing to get exposed to lots of different contexts really quickly, and yeah, to learn and, as you say, meet lots of interesting people. It's really fun. So, and also there's obviously downsides to being an employee as well. So yeah, yeah. In terms of just, I guess, yeah. In terms of, I think one of the things that I recognise as being really sort of valuable is the lack of sort of internal meetings. I
Mhm.
think that's probably something that's quite stark around sort of being an employee and not being an employee. I
Yeah.
think that just like I have very few, because obviously we're a really small team of three, and we'll tend to sort of actually just, we don't really have sort of many formal meetings at
Formal.
all.
Yeah.
We'll just kind of have a chat if something arises. But I think as businesses get bigger, perhaps maybe if they're more distributed as well, this is probably not this pretty massive generalization, but I think that it's really brought home. Like I think back to when I was an employee, and sometimes it'd be like half the day would be meetings, and I would sort of not even bat an eyelid at that and be sort of like, oh, that's just the
And
way it goes.
sometimes
But
you
now
wouldn't
I
need
look
to
at it,
be
I'm
in
like,
those
how do I
meetings
get anything?
either.
Yeah, I think
Sometimes you're
it's
just
a
there.
big thing about productivity. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I
Yeah.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I
I was
think
in
we
a meeting
probably,
recently and I did
yeah.
need to be in it for some of it, but I needed to be in it for the first 10 minutes. And then, the last hour and a bit, I didn't actually need to be there, but I still had to be there. So yeah, completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think it's like it's interesting in the context of like the UK's, like, I mean, it's probably not a UK specific thing at all, but it's interesting when you hear about the UK productivity kind of issues around like productivity growth hasn't gone up, and it's certainly
Hmm.
something where when that I think of like how many kind of, in terms of like, I guess in quotes, like white collar work is like
Hmm.
internal meetings. I think that, yeah, it's something that does strike me as being something that probably people should look at more as how do we reduce how much time we're spending in that.
Hmm.
Yeah, but that's a whole other
Oh
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, so onto the bonus questions then. So this one's really interesting. Ask it to everyone that comes on. So if you could advise B2B businesses to do one thing in their marketing, what would it be?
Well, again, this comes back to what I've spoken about a few times in terms of actually like integrating marketing across the whole business. Like, get your marketing people sat down with finance, get them sat down with operations, get them sat down with the technical people, get them sat down with everybody, obviously individually. I often see marketing bundled in with sales. And obviously, it does need to be involved with sales, but it also needs to be so much more. Like, you really need to involve your marketing in everything from the beginning, like from your say you're doing a product, like from the beginning of the product idea generation all the way through to after the sales. Because sometimes what you see is, oh, we want to sell XYZ. Oh, right, okay, well, go and market it, but you haven't involved them in the whole product life cycle, then they're not going to be able to do it. So yeah, it's about integrating it and getting everybody involved and to buy in to why marketing is there. Don't just have it like, oh, we need to have a marketing department. Right, okay, well, we'll do that. And then just almost push them to the side or just push them in with sales because that's what I see and happens a lot.
Yeah, and it reminds me of what you were saying about marketing being sometimes being a bit of a bolt-on in
Mm.
manufacturing, and I guess it sounds as though that could be sort of almost like a lesson that you've learned in your career, maybe having seen a few different contexts, and yeah, it certainly resonates. I think particularly that point about marketing being connected with the finance team. I think
Hmm.
that's really interesting because I think that that connection, weirdly, is probably not one that I've heard people talk about much. So
No, well, they don't think, why should we sit down together? Because a lot of the time, like, the finance people are focused on their numbers. Why do I need to worry about what you're marketing? The marketing people will be like, why do I need to know how much it costs? But actually, you both need to know. You both need to be involved.
yeah, and I think it's about as well, like finance ultimately are making decisions around marketing budgets.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, if they don't feel confidence that when they give the marketing function money that they're
It's
going
going
to
to be
get
useful.
more,
Yeah.
they're going to get it back plus some more, then they're yeah. So I think that's a great piece of advice. And finally, what's your most contrarian take when it comes to B2B marketing?
So something that I've noticed in the last few years, I'm sure you've noticed it too, is everyone is always talking about sustainability. And I'm actually really, really passionate about sustainability. When I worked at Hogen Systems, it literally physically was a sustainable product as far as a product can be sustainable. But now everyone is shouting that they are sustainable. And it comes to the point where it's just a buzzword. And ultimately, it can be sometimes seen as greenwashing, because even these people that are saying they're sustainable, they aren't looking at their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions. Like, they might just be looking at their scope 1. Whereas then you look at the companies who can actually say that they are sustainable, and that's where B corporations, the B Corp status is coming from, because you have to physically prove that you are sustainable. And I think in that terms, absolutely, yes, shout about the fact that you are sustainable. I think that that's great because you can prove it. But I think there are too many businesses just being like, we're a sustainable business, and they've got absolutely nothing to back that up. And I think it's become a bit of a buzzword, and it's losing its actual value of being like, why even bother trying to be sustainable when Tom, Dick, and Harry can say that they are and they're actually not?
Yeah, yeah, I think I remember actually that was something that came up when I was working as an employee, and I was in the sort of sustainability. I can't remember the name, but it was like the group of employees who were sort of, I guess, like almost volunteering to look at ways to make the company more
Mm-hmm.
sustainable. And I remember somebody actually else in the company kind of raised it and was like, I don't know why we're doing this, because I feel like this is probably us greenwashing, which wasn't the
Mm-hmm.
intention at all. But I think
No, but it
it was something
happens.
that I remembered at the time. Yeah, I mean, I think at the time we were looking at how do we become carbon neutral, which was
Mm-hmm.
about uh, in terms of when I was at this company, and that's around offsetting rather than
Yeah,
around becoming, which and I know there's quite a lot of nuances to that as well in
I
terms
was
of
going to say,
whether
like,
there's
even when
any,
it comes
whether there's any
to
value in that.
offsetting,
Yeah.
there's huge arguments in that, and like, sustainability and greenwashing is a whole topic on itself. But I'm just very aware that I know a lot of companies that say, oh, we're sustainable, and I'm like, yeah, how are you sustainable? Please tell me how you are. And they can't, because, or they'll do something very, very simple, like, oh, we've switched to LED lights. Okay, well done, but that's not enough. That doesn't make you sustainable. You've got to do a lot more. And I think people just use it as a buzzword, and it's lost its value because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my instinct on it would just be to be super cautious. I think
Hmm.
so I think it makes sense what you're saying in terms of just unless you are absolutely certain,
Hmm.
because I think the
Yeah,
last thing you'd want to do would be to be saying something that
yeah.
kind of was an exaggeration or wasn't quite the truth. So I think
If
it's
you
just
are
something
sure
that
that
you
you're
wouldn't want to
sustainable,
touch.
go for B Corp status, because then that's literally, that is a certification that says, and it's quite stringent. It's quite difficult to get B Corp status, and you have to reapply for it. It's not like, oh, you've got that badge once and you've got it forever. You have to keep reapplying for it. And I think that that's really important. So I'm really glad that these kind of regulations are coming in. I just wish that we could stop everyone saying that they're sustainable when they're not.
Yeah, makes sense. And we actually, one of our clients is a B Corp, and they
Perfect.
definitely take it. Yeah, they
Yeah,
definitely
love
take it
that.
really seriously, and it is actually, they walk the walk as well as talking the talk. So which is great, and
Yeah, that's super
it's good to
important.
work with a business that kind of is doing some great
Hmm.
stuff in that space. So Yeah, in fact, they're actually in the IT space, and
Oh,
they
nice.
do things like they partner with organizations to mean that IT equipment is recycled. That's one
Perfect. Yeah.
particularly cool thing, as well as like various other things around carbon emissions and so on. But yeah, no, it's a really thought provoking note to finish on, I think. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on. It's
Thank you for
been
having me.
no, it's been great, and I think the manufacturing topic is one that I think I want to learn
Mhm.
more about. I think
Yeah. I mean,
being
I
in
think
being in Sheffield.
it's such a huge part of the industry, and I mean, I know things are like the way of the world is moving, but manufacturing's not going anywhere anytime soon. It's still going to be a huge part of the economy. So, we want to keep it in the economy. So if we can market it better, then that's the best thing we can do.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also as it matures in terms of marketing in
Mm.
manufacturing matures, because I think that's something I've been hearing about quite a lot. That it's a sort of a sector that is probably in the B2B world is one of the next in line to kind of become really mature from a marketing perspective, because there's so much
Mhm.
kind of potential there. So yeah, and then yeah, the MBA is also really interesting. Also to hear about kind of how that came about. I think that will hopefully
Mhm.
be interesting to people listening, because I think that's a really interesting option, as you say, if people,
If you like
um,
to learn,
yeah,
look at
if you got the sort of
apprenticeships.
the appetite for it,
Mhm.
um,
Because I
yeah,
would
and
really recommend
yeah,
doing an apprenticeship. I really would.
yeah, yeah, it's a really interesting area, and then also, yeah, interesting. It's always interesting to hear different people's perspectives on freelancing, particularly as in marketing, so many people are either doing it or considering doing it, or have already done it. So yeah, thank you very much. And yeah,
Thank you.
finally, then, if people want to keep in touch with you, what's the best way for people to do that?
Probably on LinkedIn. I think I'm just Charlotte Allen 91, and that is me. That is where I am.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, and yeah,
Thank you.
have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Cheers.